When the cloud of doubt covers your heart, remember, just like the sun, God's light is always shining, even if you cannot see it. In a world where shadows often threaten to extinguish the light of hope, a group of ordinary men embarks on a journey that will forever change their understanding of faith and resilience. The sun was beginning its slow descent toward the horizon, casting long golden rays over the Sea of Galilee. The air was still, almost reverent, as if the very earth knew something sacred was taking place. Jesus and his disciples had come to this quiet hillside after a long day of teaching and ministering to the crowds. Normally, in these peaceful moments of rest, the disciples would feel rejuvenated by the presence of their teacher. But today was different. A heaviness hung in the air, a weight that pressed down on their hearts. Doubt. It was a feeling that had begun to creep in, silently, without warning, and now it clung to them like a shadow. They had been following Jesus for many months, witnessing his miracles, hearing his teachings, and yet, something in their hearts was uncertain. Could they truly live up to his calling? Could they, simple fishermen and tax collectors, truly change the world? What if they failed? What if they weren't strong enough? These questions swirled in their minds, creating a fog of doubt that seemed impossible to escape. Jesus, always attuned to the hearts of those around him, noticed the unrest among his friends. As they sat scattered on the grass, staring out at the sea, he could feel the tension in the air. His eyes, filled with both love and understanding, swept over them, resting for a moment on each face. He could see the fear behind Peter's bold exterior, the uncertainty in John's normally serene gaze, the hidden anxiety in Matthew's eyes. The disciples had always looked to Jesus for guidance, but today their hearts were clouded. Jesus knew that this moment was important. Their doubts were real, and they needed more than just words of comfort. They needed something deeper, something that would stay with them long after the clouds of doubt had passed. After a long silence, Jesus spoke, his voice soft but full of authority. "My dear friends," he began, "I see the worry in your hearts, the doubt that weighs heavy on your souls. It is like a cloud that covers the sun, hiding its light from your eyes." The disciples looked up at him, startled by how perfectly he had described what they were feeling. They had spoken little of their doubts to one another, but somehow Jesus had seen straight into their hearts. Peter, ever the one to speak first, broke the silence. "But Lord," he said, his voice heavy with emotion, "sometimes the clouds feel like they'll never pass. The fear, the uncertainty, it's like a storm that never ends. We want to believe, but what if we're not enough? What if we can't do what you've called us to do?" The others nodded, their faces reflecting the same fears. They had seen Jesus perform miracles, heal the sick, and command the storms, but when they thought about their own role in his mission, they felt small and inadequate. How could they possibly carry his message to the world? Jesus, seeing the deep distress in their hearts, rose slowly and beckoned for them to follow him. Without hesitation, they stood and followed him up a little farther along the hill, where the view of the sunset was unobstructed and the sea stretched out before them like a vast, shimmering mirror. The sky was painted with vibrant hues of orange, pink, and gold, but even this beauty did little to lift the cloud of doubt from the disciples' hearts. They stood together, waiting, knowing that Jesus had something important to share with them. His teachings had always been full of truth and wisdom, but today they needed more than teaching. They needed hope. Jesus motioned for them to sit, and as they did, he began to speak, his voice calm and steady, like the gentle waves lapping against the shore. "There was once a young farmer," he said, "who lived in a small village much like the ones we passed through on our journeys. He was a hard worker, dedicated to his fields and cared deeply for his crops. One year, after he had planted his seeds and tended to the soil, a great cloud appeared in the sky. It was a heavy, dark cloud that seemed to settle over his fields for many days. The sun, which had once shone brightly and nourished his crops, was now hidden, and the farmer grew anxious. The disciples listened intently, their eyes focused on Jesus. They could almost picture the young farmer standing in his fields, looking up at the sky, helpless as the darkness covered the land. It wasn't hard to imagine. After all, they felt like that farmer, standing under the shadow of doubt, unsure if the light would ever return. The cloud remained for weeks, Jesus continued. Day after day the farmer went out to his fields, hoping to see the sun again, but each day the sky remained gray. Without the sunlight, the crops began to wither, and the young man's fear grew. He prayed for the cloud to part, for the sun to shine again, but still the sky remained dark. He began to lose hope, believing that all his work had been in vain. Jesus paused for a moment, allowing the weight of the story to settle into the hearts of his disciples. The silence was thick, and the only sound was the soft rustling of the wind through the grass. One evening, Jesus continued, as the young farmer stood on the edge of his fields, watching the darkened sky, an old man from the village came to visit him. The old man had lived many years, and his face was lined with the wisdom of a life filled with both sunshine and storms. He saw the young farmer's distress and asked, "Why are you so troubled, my son?" "Because the sun is gone and my crops are dying," the young farmer replied. "Without its light, everything I've worked for will be lost." The old man smiled gently and looked up at the sky. "The sun is not gone, my child," he said. "It is merely hidden from your sight. The cloud that covers it may seem heavy and endless, but it is only passing through. The sun is still shining as brightly as ever, even though you cannot see it. You must be patient, for in time the cloud will part and the light will return. Trust in the sun even when it is hidden." The young farmer listened carefully, and though his fear did not leave him all at once, the old man's words planted a seed of hope in his heart. He continued to tend to his crops, even though the cloud remained, trusting that the sun would return. And sure enough, a few days later the cloud began to break. The sun shone brightly once again, and the farmer's crops grew more abundantly than he had ever imagined. He learned that the cloud was never permanent, it was simply a part of the journey. As Jesus finished the story, a deep silence settled over the group. The disciples sat quietly, reflecting on the words they had just heard. The story had been simple, but its message was profound. They too felt like the young farmer, staring up at the clouds of doubt that blocked the light of their faith. But now they began to understand that the clouds were not permanent. They were only passing through. Jesus looked at them with love in his eyes, knowing that his words had touched their hearts. "My dear friends," he said softly, "you are like that farmer. Doubt, like a cloud, will come upon you from time to time. It may cover your heart and you may feel lost or uncertain. But remember this, just as the sun never stops shining, neither does the love of God. The clouds will pass and you will see the light again. You must trust, even in the darkness, that God's love is constant, unwavering, and brighter than any doubt." Tears welled up in the eyes of some of the disciples. The weight of their doubts, which had seemed so overwhelming only moments ago, now felt lighter. They had followed Jesus because they believed in his words, but in this moment, they understood more deeply. Even when the clouds of doubt seemed unending, the light of God's love was always there, shining just beyond the darkness. Peter, his voice thick with emotion, spoke first. "Lord, I understand now. The doubt we feel, it's not greater than your light. The cloud, it's just a shadow. It can't stop the sun from shining." Jesus placed his hand on Peter's shoulder, a smile of deep affection on his face. "Yes, Peter. The cloud may cover for a time, but it will always pass. The light is constant. Hold on to this truth even in the darkness." The disciples sat in silence, letting the weight of Jesus' words settle into their hearts. The sun, now lower in the sky, cast long shadows over the land, but it shone with a warmth that reminded them of the hope that was always present, even in the darkest of times. As they rose to continue their journey, their hearts felt lighter, their spirits lifted. Doubt, they realized, might visit them again, but it would never have the last word. The clouds of doubt were only temporary, God's light was eternal. And with this truth they would go forth, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. knowing that they were never alone. As the group began to walk, Jesus spoke once more, his voice carrying a final message of love and hope. Remember, my friends, when the clouds come, do not fear. For the light is always with you, and you are stronger than the darkness. As the disciples walked down the hillside, a newfound energy pulsed through their veins. They were no longer weighed down by the clouds of doubt that had lingered so heavily in their hearts. Instead, they carried a flicker of light, a promise of hope that ignited their spirits. Jesus led the way, his presence radiating peace and purpose. But the journey ahead would not be without challenges. As they approached a small village, they could see a commotion near the town square. A crowd had gathered, and the air buzzed with tension. Jesus' compassionate gaze narrowed as he approached the scene, sensing the need for his intervention. In the center of the crowd, a desperate father clutched his son, who was writhing in pain. The boy appeared to be suffering from a debilitating illness, and the father's anguished cries echoed in the air. "Please, someone help him. I have tried everything, but no one can heal him." The disciples exchanged worried glances. They had witnessed Jesus perform miracles before, but this was different. Doubts crept in again, whispering in their minds. Would they be able to help? What if they failed this time? Jesus stepped forward, his voice calm yet powerful. "Bring the boy to me," he said. The father, though trembling with fear, carried his son to Jesus. The crowd fell silent, anticipation hanging in the air. As Jesus knelt beside the boy, he placed his hand on his forehead. The warmth of his touch seemed to radiate through the boy's frail body, and a moment of stillness enveloped them. "What is troubling you?" Jesus asked the father gently. The man, his voice trembling, replied, "I believe, but help my unbelief. I fear my son will never be whole again." The disciples watched intently, caught in the tension of the moment. They could feel the weight of the father's doubt mirrored in their own hearts. Could they truly believe that healing was possible? Jesus looked into the father's eyes with deep compassion. "All things are possible for one who believes," he affirmed, his tone unwavering. The words resonated deeply, stirring something within the hearts of the disciples. As the crowd watched in hushed anticipation, Jesus turned to the boy and commanded, "You are healed in the name of love. Rise and be whole." The air crackled with energy, and a brilliant light seemed to illuminate the space around them. Slowly, the boy opened his eyes and rose to his feet, astonished and free from pain. Gasps of amazement filled the crowd as the father fell to his knees, tears of joy streaming down his face. "Thank you, Lord. Thank you," he cried, overwhelmed with gratitude. The disciples stood in awe, their doubts shattered like glass in the presence of such a miracle. They felt the warmth of Jesus' light filling their hearts, illuminating the shadows that had once clouded their faith. This was what they were called to, being vessels of hope and healing in a world desperate for light. As the crowd began to disperse, filled with wonder and joy, Jesus turned to his disciples. "You see, my friends, when doubt comes, it can cloud our vision and make us forget the power of belief. But remember the young farmer. He tended to his crops even when the clouds were heavy, trusting in the sun's return. You too must nurture your faith even in the face of uncertainty." With each encounter, the disciples began to grasp the profound lessons Jesus imparted. They traveled from village to village, sharing his teachings and witnessing countless miracles. Their faith grew stronger with each step, and though doubt still whispered at times, they learned to silence it with the truth of God's love. One day, as they rested by the Sea of Galilee, the disciples began to share their experiences. "Do you remember the father and his son?" John asked, his eyes sparkling with excitement. "That moment changed everything for me. It was like the clouds lifted and I could see clearly." Matthew nodded in agreement. "I realized that our purpose is to bring light to others, to remind them of the sun that never stops shining, just as Jesus did for us." Peter, reflecting on their journey, added, "We must always hold on to the truth that even when we feel weak, we are never alone. Our faith may falter, but God's light is constant." As they shared their stories, they felt a profound bond, one rooted in their shared experiences of doubt and hope. The once feared clouds had become a source of strength, reminding them that their journeys were intertwined with a greater purpose. Months passed, and the disciples continued their mission, emboldened by the lessons they had learned. They faced challenges, hardships, and moments of uncertainty, but they approached each trial with a renewed sense of purpose. They understood that doubt was not their enemy, it was a part of their growth. One evening, as they gathered around a fire, Jesus looked at them with pride. "You have come so far," he said, his voice filled with warmth. "You have learned to trust in the light, even when the clouds obscure your vision. Never forget that it is in the darkness that you can shine the brightest." The disciples sat in contemplative silence, absorbing the weight of his words. They had transformed from fearful followers into empowered messengers of hope. They knew that the world would continue to present clouds of doubt, but they also knew that they carried within them the light of God's love, a light that could pierce through any darkness. As the fire crackled and the stars began to twinkle overhead, they felt a sense of peace wash over them. Together, they embraced the truth that the clouds of doubt would come and go, but the light of hope would always remain. With renewed resolve, they committed themselves to spreading the message of love and faith far and wide, knowing that their journey was just beginning. And so, armed with the wisdom they had gained, they ventured into the world, ready to face whatever storms lay ahead, holding fast to the eternal truth that God's light is always shining, even when they cannot see it. This is end of the story. Comment amen if you believe in Jesus' blessings. Please like this video and subscribe this channel for more Jesus story like this. May the God watch over you.